During the first 20 years of life, the human body changes continuously and dramatically. The average individual's height multiplies, as does his weight. Compared to an infant, who is generally chubby, slightly disproportionate head size as compared to the rest of the body, a child is better proportioned. Likewise, an adult is taller, broader, and more muscular than a child. The human body is transforming in the first 2 decades, and the most dramatic phase in this transformation process takes place with the onset of puberty, the time period when a child attains sexual maturity and becomes an adolescent. Adolescents face many challenges in all aspects of their lives. Physically, their bodies are maturing quickly. They also start becoming sexually interested. Sharma describes adolescence as a phase of life that begins in biology and ends in society. This implies that the physical and biological changes are universal and take place owing to physiological maturation. The psychosocial and behavioral manifestations are determined by the meaning given to these changes within a cultural system. The experience of adolescence during teenage years would vary considerably according to the cultural and social values of the network of social identities they are part of. Physical maturation. Growth spurt. The term growth spurt describes the rapid acceleration in height and weight that marks the beginning of adolescence, a growth rate which is faster than any growth rate since the children were infants. Girls typically enter the growth spurt by age 10 and a half, reach a peak growth by age 12, about 1.3 years before menarche, and return to a slower rate of growth by age 13 to 13 and a half. Studies have shown that most girls gain only about 2.5 centimeters in height after menarche. Boys lag behind girls by 2 to 3 years. They generally begin their growth spurt by age 13, peak at age 14, and return to a more gradual rate of growth by age 16. Abbasi suggested that it is not uncommon for females to be among the tallest 2 or 3 students in a middle school classroom. By the end of the growth spurt, boys have increased 28 to 31 centimeters in height and girls 27.5 to 29 centimeters. In addition to growing taller and heavier, the body assumes an adult-like appearance during adolescent growth spurt. Perhaps the most noticeable changes are the appearance of breasts and a widening of the hips for girls and a broadening of shoulders for boys. Facial features also assume adult proportions as the forehead protrudes, the nose and jaw become more prominent, and the lips enlarge. Fueling the growth of adolescence. A dramatic increase in food consumption fuels the rapid physical growth of adolescence. During the growth spurt, the average girl requires 2200 calories a day and the average boy 2800 calories. Calories alone do not nourish this growth. Several nutrients are also essential, particularly calcium and iron. Milk and certain vegetables provide calcium for bone growth, and calcium may prevent osteoporosis, the thinning of bones that affects 25% of women in later life. Iron is also necessary, as iron deficiency anemia is not uncommon among teenagers. For most adolescents, the major issue is eating a sufficient balance of nutritious foods. Two extremes of nutrition concern a substantial minority and can create real threats to health: obesity and eating disorders. Obesity. The most common nutritional concern in adolescence is obesity. 1 in 5 adolescents is overweight and 1 in 20 can be classified as obese. Adolescents are obese for the same reasons as younger children, but special concerns with body image may have severe psychological consequences at this age, especially with regards to self-esteem and identity. Many disorders have been seen amongst the growing adolescents. Eating disorders are common. Anorexia nervosa is an eating disorder that causes people to obsess about their weight and the food they eat. People with anorexia nervosa attempt to maintain a weight that's far below normal for their age and weight and height. To prevent height gain or to continue losing weight, people with anorexia nervosa may starve themselves or exercise excessively. Anorexia nervosa can be difficult to overcome, but with treatment you can gain a better sense of who you are, return to healthier eating habits, and reverse some of anorexia's serious complications. Bulimia, also called bulimia nervosa, is an eating disorder. Bulimia is characterized by episodes of secretive excessive eating followed by inappropriate methods of weight control such as self-induced vomiting, abuse of laxatives and diuretics, or excessive exercise. Like anorexia, bulimia is a psychological disorder. It is another condition that goes beyond out of control dieting. The cycle of overeating and purging can quickly become an obsession, similar to an addiction to drugs or other substances. The disorder generally occurs after a variety of unsuccessful attempts at dieting. Sexual maturation. Sexual maturity is the age or stage when an organism can reproduce. It is sometimes considered synonymous with adulthood. In humans, the process of sexually maturing is termed puberty. Maturation of reproductive system occurs at roughly the same time as the adolescent growth spurt and follows a predictable sequence for girls and boys. Sexual development in girls. For most girls, sexual maturation begins earlier than the growth spurt. That is, it begins around 9 to 11 years as fatty tissue accumulates around their nipples, forming small breast buds. Full breast development, which takes place roughly 5 years, finishes around age 14. Pubic hair usually begin to appear a little later, although some girls may develop some before their breasts begin to develop. At the time of growth spurt, girls' breasts grow rapidly and the sex organs begin to mature. Internally, the vagina becomes larger and the walls of the uterus develop a powerful set of muscles that may one day be used to accommodate a fetus during pregnancy and to push it through the cervix and vagina during the birth process. Externally, the mons pubis, the labia, the clitoris all increase in size and become more sensitive to touch. Menarche, the time of the first menstruation, is a significant event in the sexual maturation process, as it indicates that the young female is now fertile and is at least physically ready to reproduce. The average age of menarche has declined over the last century, but the magnitude of the decline and the factors responsible remain subjects of contention. Some estimates suggest that the median age of menarche worldwide is 14 and that there is a later age of onset in Asian populations compared to the West. Rakshit reported mean menarcheal age as 14 years 4 months. Study undertaken by ICMR reported the mean menarcheal age for Maharashtrian girls as 13 years 9 months. Kundalkar reported it to be 13 years 2 months. In 2000, Bagga and Kulkarni reported the mean age of menarche to be 12 years 6 months, or this estimate is close to the global estimate. Sexual development in boys. Just like growth spurt, sexual maturation also begins late in boys as compared to girls, that is around 11 to 12 years of age. It begins with the enlargement of the testes, accompanied or soon followed by the appearance of unpigmented pubic hair. At the same time, the scrotum also grows, it thins and darkens and descends to its pendulous adult position. Meanwhile, the penis lengthens and widens. At about 13 to 14 and a half to 15, most boys will have reached puberty and are capable of fathering a child. Somewhat later, boys begin to sprout facial hair, first at the corners of the upper lip, then on the sides of the face, and finally on the chin and jawline. Body hair also grows on the arms and legs, although signs of a hairy chest may not appear until late teens or early 20s, if at all. Another hallmark of male sexual maturity is a lowering of the voice as the larynx grows and the vocal cords lengthen. Adolescent sexuality. The biological upheaval of puberty brings about major hormonal changes, one of which is increased production of the androgens in both boys and girls, which dramatically increases one's sex drive. Freud talked about the genital stage of psychosexual development, which explains the newfound increase in the level of interest in the members of the opposite sex. Social and cultural contexts guide how adolescents manage and express their sexual feelings. For instance, on the island of Ponap, 4 and 5-year-olds receive a thorough sex education from adults and are encouraged to experiment with one another, while in India, sex education is generally introduced around grade 7. However, the appropriate time for its introduction is still being debated. Contrary to popular beliefs in Western cultures too, like Asian cultures, adults discourage having sex talk with children, and these cultures can thus be considered relatively restrictive. Social impact of pubertal changes. Maturing adolescents not only come to feel differently about themselves, but also come to be viewed and treated differently by other people. In many societies, rituals called rites of passage inform the whole community that a child has become an adult. The ritual aspect of rites of passage is argued to be the key element that links to the psychosocial conception of identity formation. It is the performance and reception of rituals that occur throughout the rite of passage ceremony that advance the outcomes of optimal identity development. For example, the Kinalda is a rite of passage for Navajo girls that is a celebration of entry into womanhood and firmly establishes them within the context of family life and Navajo society. The social and celebratory aspects of this rite of passage are remarkable and in stark contrast to the privacy and embarrassment that sometimes accompany the onset of menses among girls in European America. As stated by Navajo educator Russell, in Navajo society, the girl's first period is not a time of shame and anxiety, but a time of happiness and rejoicing. Apart from the impact of pubertal transition on the parent-child relations and identity development, timing of puberty also has some meaningful implications, although its impact differs somewhat for boys and girls. Impact on boys. Longitudinal research conducted suggests that boys who mature early enjoy a number of social advantages over boys who mature late. According to Simmons and Blyth, one reason may be that his greater size and strength often makes him a more capable athlete, which in turn may garner recognition from adults and peers alike. People also tend to overestimate the early maturing adolescent's competencies and tend to grant him privileges and responsibilities normally reserved for older individuals. Parents too often hold higher educational and achievement aspirations for early maturing than for late maturing sons. Additional benefits may include assumption of position of leadership within the peer group, rise in self-esteem and self-confidence, etc. Impact on girls. Unlike boys, maturing early for girls may be somewhat of a disadvantage. Although early breast development is associated with a favorable body image and increased self-confidence, research has shown that early maturing girls tend to be less outgoing and less popular than their pre-pubertal classmates and are also less likely to report more symptoms of anxiety and depression as well. Overall, both the advantages of maturing early and the disadvantages of maturing late are greater for boys than for girls. But even though the late maturing boys and early maturing girls are more likely to be distressed, the psychological differences between early and late maturers become smaller and more mixed in nature by adulthood. Causes and correlates of physical and sexual development. Physical and sexual development during adolescence results from a complex and continuous interplay between the forces of nature and nurture. Bodily growth and maturation are influenced by a number of factors that act independently or in concert to modify an individual's genetic potential. The secular trend in height and adolescent development is further evidence for the significant influence of environmental factors on an individual's genetic potential for linear growth. Nutrition, including energy and specific nutrient intake, is a major detriment of growth. Paramount to normal growth is the general health and well-being of an individual. In fact, normal growth is a strong testament to the overall good health of a child. The biology of growth. Despite of individual differences in the growth rate of children, the sequence of both physical maturation and motor development is reasonably consistent from child to child. Apparently, these regular maturational sequences that all humans share are species-specific attributes, products of our common genetic heritage. Apart from the common human genes, we have each inherited a unique combination of genes that influence our physical growth and development. For example, twin studies have shown that identical twins are much more similar in height than fraternal twins, whether the measurements are taken during first year of life at 4 years of age or in early adulthood. They have reported that rate of maturation is also genetically influenced for female identical twins, that they reach menarche within 2 to 3 months of each other, whereas fraternal twin sisters are typically about 10 to 12 months apart. The influence of genetics upon the onset and progression of puberty for both boys and girls has been proven to be very strong. The genetic influence can be understood with the help of study of their influence on hormonal production, which in turn influences the physical and sexual maturational processes. The endocrinology of growth. The hypothalamus, anterior pituitary gland, and gonads of the fetus, neonate, infant, and prepubertal child are all capable of secreting hormones in adult concentrations. Although all hormones are necessary for normal development, yet certain hormones play a key role in the process. For example, thyroxine secreted by thyroid gland is essential for the early brain growth as well as for the nervous system. Growth hormone secreted by the master gland stimulates the rapid growth and development of body cells. It releases in small amounts several times a day and is essential for normal growth and development as well. Children who lack this hormone do grow, and they are usually well proportioned as adults, but they'll stand only about 130 centimeter, that is a little over 4 feet tall. Research has shown that even before any recognizable changes occur in the adolescent body, pituitary secretions are already underway, stimulating a girl's ovaries to produce more estrogen and a boy's testes to produce more testosterone. The female hormone estrogen can be held accountable for the sexual maturation in girls, as it triggers the growth of breasts, uterus, vagina, pubic and underarm hair, and the widening of hips. Likewise, in boys, testosterone is responsible for growth of the penis and prostate, voice changes, and the development of facial and body hair. Finally, androgen secreted by adrenal glands plays a secondary role in promoting the maturation of muscles and bones in both sexes. Environmental influences. According to Schaffer and Kipp, 3 kinds of environmental influences can have a major effect on physical growth and maturation: nutrition, illness, and the quality of care that children receive. It is obvious that children who are inadequately nourished grow very slowly, if at all. The dramatic effect of malnutrition on physical development can be seen by comparing the heights and weight of children from enriched societies and underprivileged societies. The negative influencers. Although adolescence is considered usually one of the healthiest periods of life, but it is also the age when the person tends to indulge in risky behavior, which may prove detrimental for their maturation process. Illegal drug use during adolescence is very common these days. Some adolescents use them to escape the pressures of everyday life, however temporarily. Peer pressure may also expose some innocent adolescents towards the trap of illegal drug use. The use of these drugs, especially because of their addictive nature, poses threat to the adolescent's physical and psychological being. Sexual activity among adolescents is much higher and begins at an earlier age than what is commonly believed. Adolescents are therefore vulnerable and at risk of unwanted pregnancies, owing to ignorance and lack of access to contraceptives in their early teens. In the Indian setting, it is highly debated whether sex education is necessary in schools. Adolescents in India are poorly informed about their physical development and sexuality. Inadequate information tends to render them helpless and confused most of the time. The ignorance gets accentuated by lack of proper sex education, low educational attainment, and often the influence of existing socio-cultural background. Often the children feel lost as they have no reliable person to talk to regarding their queries on sex-related topics. This happens because parents want their children to be uninformed about matters related to sex and reproduction, since sex and puberty are often considered embarrassing and even unclean. During the first 20 years of life, the human body changes continuously and dramatically. Major changes come especially during adolescence. Physical maturation as well as sexual maturation takes place during this phase. Sharma describes adolescence as a phase of life that begins in biology and ends in society. Growth spurt describes the rapid acceleration in height and weight that marks the beginning of adolescence. Females experience growth spurt before their male counterparts. The most noticeable changes are the appearance of breasts and a widening of the hips for girls and a broadening of the shoulders for boys. A dramatic increase in food consumption fuels the rapid physical growth of adolescence. For most adolescents, the major issue is eating a sufficient balance of nutritious foods. Two extremes of nutrition concern a substantial minority and can create real threats to health, obesity, and eating disorders. Sexual maturity is the age or stage when an organism can reproduce. In humans, this stage is referred to as puberty. Maturation of the reproductive system occurs at roughly the same time as the adolescent growth spurt and follows a predictable sequence for girls and boys. For most girls, sexual maturation begins earlier than the growth spurt, that is, it begins around 9 to 11 years, while it begins late in boys, that is around 11 to 12 years of age. With adolescent also comes the dramatic increase in sex drive and hence the issue of adolescent sexuality. In many societies, rituals called rites of passage inform the whole community that a child has become an adult. Apart from the impact of pubertal transition on the parent-child relations and identity development, timing of puberty also has some meaningful implications, although its impact differs somewhat for boys and girls. Both the advantages of maturing early and the disadvantages of maturing late are greater for boys than for girls. But even though the late maturing boys and early maturing girls are more likely to be distressed, the psychological differences between early and late maturers become smaller and more mixed in nature by adulthood. Physical and sexual development during adolescence results from a complex and continuous interplay between the forces of nature and nurture. Among the biological causes and correlates are the genes and the endocrinal secretions called hormones, which are responsible for the physical and sexual maturational process. Three kinds of environmental influences can have a major effect on physical growth and maturation, that is nutrition, illness, and quality of care that children receive. Adolescents are also highly vulnerable to illegal drug use, alcohol and tobacco addiction, as well as engaging in unsafe sexual activity, which may prove detrimental for the maturation process.